Hey, the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible by Samaritas, which is the state's largest private foster care and adoption agency. But they do a heck of a lot more than that. They've been serving homeless families, persons with disabilities, abused and trafficked women. They're also one of the largest resettlement agencies in the state. They provide market rate and affordable housing for seniors and HUD housing for families. And they also have skilled nursing, memory care, and rehab communities in Grand Rapids, Cadillac, and Saginaw. Samaritas, thanks for their support. Great organization doing great stuff all around the state. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the week that was on Deadline Detroit. I'm Craig Fahle. So glad to have you with me today. There is a ton to discuss. Lots of things that happened this week, things that are happening as we speak right now, unfolding across the country. A couple of different cities seeing some significant protests and a lot that goes along with that. Louisville, Kentucky, Minneapolis, obviously. We're going to get into all of this today. And helping me this week to break it down, of course, is Allan Lengel. He is a regular guest. He is the editor and co-founder of Deadline Detroit. Allan, thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We have our friend Greg Bowens, who's a contributor to Deadline as well. Long time PR political activist here in the community and a good friend. Thank you for being here, Greg.
Long time. You make me sound old, man.
And former Detroit News reporter.
Oh, that's true. We can add all that stuff.
We worked together at the Detroit News.
Yeah. And then we, of course, have my old friend M.L. Elrick with us, of course, back with the Detroit Free Press these days, and of course, hosts the M.L. Soul of Detroit podcast as well. Thank you for taking time to join us today. I appreciate it very much.
I got nothing but time.
Well, hey, you look in the middle of this, pandemic. Obviously, you've been dealing with it up close and personal, ML, and glad to see that you're doing okay.
I'm doing as well as I ever have, which is I could still do better, but this is going to have to do.
Well, I'll tell you what. I woke up this morning and I almost immediately after, first thing I do obviously is, you pick up the phone, you start leafing through all the different subscriptions that you have and papers and articles, and I almost immediately had to detach for a minute, go take a walk, calm myself down, because what I see happening in Minneapolis right now and the reaction to it has got me worked up in a major way. Of course, the death of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police officer, actually I should say at the knee of the Minneapolis police officer. He was flat out murdered. Prosecutor yesterday says, well, there might be some other evidence that shows that we can't press charges at this point in time. That did not help the situation in Minneapolis yesterday. And of course, you now have mass protests going on in there. They burnt down a police precinct last night. And I'm not surprised to see this type of reaction at all. And the fact that anybody's showing shock or anger at this, I mean, I'm going to put it out there. I mean, I'm not shocked. This has been building up for a long time. And we have a president who basically says that if you kneel and protest, you're a scumbag. These guys are thugs. But the people walking into the Capitol carrying AKs are good people. I understand the frustration.
I think, it's interesting. Chief Craig yesterday had a press conference and said, look, I think he should be charged, with murder. And I think it's pretty clear. I mean, there's nothing, even if you look at the tape in totality, anything leading up to that, the man was under arrest. And after that, the man is under control. And, I was talking to a retired officer who was saying, you have all these other tools now. You have tasers, you have other things if somebody is truly out of control. But we haven't seen that, even that he was out of control, that would have required a taser, let alone him being pinned like that at some point. It's really, it's
when a guy's telling you, I can't breathe,
wiggle room there.
It looked like he was trying to use some sort of mixed martial arts move on this guy to subdue him. And that's basically a chokeout move that they use in that to get him to tap out. This guy was tapping out repeatedly. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
It's an old police tactic, which they, learned way back. But now there are other tactics. And it was never a good tactic. But now, particularly with other alternatives, it's not at all. It shouldn't be used at all. I mean, and the fact that he used it at all is something that he should have been charged with, immediately.
I feel you, Craig and Lengel. It was hard for me to watch that video and to hear the people who were, by the incident screaming at the cop to let him up and calling him a bum. And, I was wondering what would it have taken for those people who were standing by to rush the cops, and while I was grateful that there was somebody who had taped it, and you heard the people saying, "Get off him," at the same time, it was painful to sit there and watch the life being choked out of this man. And, I had a friend today, man. She did like you, Craig. She's a neighbor of ours, sister. She went to Cass with me, and she just texted me and said, "I can't take it anymore." And I said, which part? And she said, "It just feels like every day somebody's trying to kill us." And you get that feeling because you had Minneapolis, then you had the brother down in Georgia, then we can go all the way back to New York with the cigarettes and the this and the that, and it's just, and then coronavirus and all this stuff, and it gets really hard.
And Donald Trump.
And Donald Trump. And I thought for a second, I was like, wow, Trump hasn't done his usual good people on both sides crap or standing up for the cops.
Oh no, he made up his mind on this one, Greg.
Yeah, it seemed like it. And then of course, early this morning he's tweeting, those people are thugs that are rioting there in Minneapolis and I guess in other places. And it just feels like an onslaught, man. But the other thing that I think about this, and you guys tell me how you feel about it, the coronavirus tends to complicate everything. We're all on edge anyway, right? And so now we have something to fight against. You can't fight against the virus because it's invisible. It's just kind of out there. But now you can rail against the man. And there's just something about what's happening today that is so familiar. It feels like 2016. Do you guys get that feeling?
Yeah, and I would say, actually, you can fight against the virus. You have to wear your mask. You have to stay away from people, a respectful distance, and you have to wash your hands. These are the simplest things imaginable, and people can't do it. We can't come together even with science. We can't agree to do the things that cost us nothing. And it's heartbreaking. And on that point of 2016, to come back to this issue of, can you believe we are here? Yeah, I'm not at all stunned that we are here, because I think we all know, and I say this as a white guy, so I don't know it as well as a lot of other people, progress on race relations and progress on enlightening humanity is incredibly slow, glacial slow. In fact, the glaciers will be gone before we get to where we need to be on race relations. But when you take 3 years and you don't do anything, in fact, you move backwards. Trump came into office telling the Justice Department, we're going to defend these cops. We're going to stop doing investigations into incidents like this, that this is not our business. Well, in fact, it is the federal government's business, because this is happening, as Greg pointed out, all over the country. This isn't Bull Connor in Alabama. This is the United States, 50 friggin' states. And if the president wants to leave it up to 50 states to try and fight the coronavirus, that's crazy. But this is something where we need to have federal action, because, so here's the only thing that surprises me. Minnesota,
Right,
nice.
right.
I mean,
right.
you're kidding. You have to remember, Minnesota is the same place where a cop smoked a guy on a college campus. So this happens everywhere. We cannot be fooled that we live in these northern bastions of enlightenment, because it's not true.
I agree. I totally agree with that. And I think one of the problems also is that justice moves so slow that it requires it or at least triggers or ignites the reaction we're getting. It's like down in Georgia. It was 3-4 weeks before they finally said yes. I mean, here is an unarmed jogger going through simply because he's black. It was a daylight lynching of a black person running through the neighborhood, plain and simple. And yet weeks and weeks went by and there were no charges. And I think here people are saying, what more, like the police chief said, Chief Craig, he said, the guy should have been arrested. The guy should have been charged with murder. I mean, there is no before in an incident like that. It's like if there was a struggle, if something was going on, the guy was just had his knee on his neck. I mean, there's no getting around it. The guy murdered him.
Well, and the president did not help the situation. Normally in a time like this, when you have something that has the potential to become really, really large, and there are going to be some protests in downtown Detroit today at 4 o'clock. And I guarantee you there'll be a lot of people out there today at police headquarters talking, and trying to just let people know that this is unacceptable behavior and that this is something that needs to be fixed. And I'm not sure you can fix it. But some of the problems that people have been screaming about for a long time are getting attention. And thank God for social media, because this stuff was swept under the rug for decades and decades and decades. Now we get to see it up front, and people are like, is this just a new problem? No, this has been going on for a long time. And now people are finally starting to understand how people in some of the neighborhoods and cities like Detroit see the police force as an occupying army and not as people there to serve and protect. It's about time we open our eyes to the fact and the reality that people are treated differently by the police. And if you don't want to admit that, or you can't admit that, or you need to say, well, some of the cops are good guys. Okay, maybe some of the cops are good guys. But the problem is there's an institutional bias that exists in police departments across the country in the way that they deal with different people and the way that people utilize the police. We saw that evidence this week in New York when the lady calls the cops on a guy who was birding in Central Park when she was in the wrong. This sense of entitlement, this sense of these people are here to protect me from somebody I deem to be bad, as opposed to they are here to protect everybody equally, is a real issue. And the fact is, too many of my white friends refuse to admit that this is a problem.
Weaponizing the police is weaponizing the police to enforce your own racial biases is something that's been going on for a while. I understand it could be tough for cops. That guy in Central Park, he is a Harvard graduate. He's a former editor for Marvel magazine.
Yeah, Marvel Comics.
And he's on the Audubon Society board. I mean, how geeky can you be? How non-threatening can you be to be a former editor of Marvel magazine and on the board of the Audubon Society? I had to read that like 3 times just to believe it. And to have that lady try and weaponize the police in order to, get back at him for telling her to put the leash on her damn dog is crazy. But it becomes incumbent upon.
And then complaining that her life has been destroyed.
Well, I'm sure it has.
I want to say what Mike was talking about a little bit before about 2016. Look, racism and, racism doesn't go away. It hasn't vanished, but I felt like we were, even with a black president, it didn't go away. It wasn't suddenly like, oh, we elected a black president, so therefore no one, we must not be racist. But I felt we were still at least inching in the right direction. And I think when Trump got in, I felt like he was enabling people who were racist, who were embarrassed about being racist, who had been shamed about being racist, who were saying, the president is racist. Why should I be ashamed of it? He's our president. I mean, it's amazing the influence the guy has had. And it was such a setback for this country, I think. And, there's still a lot of work that has to be done. But, hatred in itself, look, being a Jew, I mean, is there anti-Semitism incidents are skyrocketing in the past 2-3 years since he became president. My sister-in-law, who's Israeli, I was talking to her yesterday, and she says, "Oh, Trump's good for Israel. He's good for the Jews." I said, "He's good for the Jews. He's also good for the Jew haters."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was a good point.
And if you look at what he put out there this morning, I mean, this was the thing that really, really sort of set me off today. And Twitter, of course, flagged this post, but he said, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty, and we will assume control. But when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you." So, of course, he's channeling this racist police chief from Miami in 1968 who said that when there were going to be protesters at one of the conventions down there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's look at what people have learned from history. Trump's old enough to have been very aware of what's going on in the world in the 60s. He went to an Ivy League university, as he's fond of reminding us. He's a very stable genius. I've seen, I won't say how much evidence I've seen to support that, but here's the lessons learned from the 60s. Detroit, send in the National Guard, city burns to the ground. Miami, police chief who says, when they start looting, we start shooting. And what did, there were other things that happened in the 60s, like peaceful protests, and why can't we get along, and why can't we try and understand what other people are like, and I have a dream. And the lessons that our president took out of the 60s is not about having a dream. It's to send the National Guard, and it's to tell the police to engage. I mean, listen, this place is burning. Do not throw gas on it. Our president, as we know, loves oil and coal. He loves to see things burn, and it's time for him to get a little green, because we don't need this now, especially. And we had a president not so long ago that when we had issues of racial profiling, he invited everybody involved to the White House for a beer. Now we got somebody who says, lock him up, drag him out of here. I mean, so I'm not saying whether Trump's a great president or a bad president. History will judge that. But tone matters. Not wearing a mask matters.
Do you remember how much crap?
Mike, is that the journalist in you saying that? You don't want to say it?
No, you know what it is? It's me just so I am a journalist, so I'm objective, but it's me just recognizing the fact that certain people are only going to do things that the president tells them to do, whether they make sense or not. So it would be nice for the president, who thinks his words are very important, to actually act like he realizes his words are important and to lead by example. Please.
Do you remember how much crap Barack Obama got when he actually talked about having the talk with his kids? When he talked about, hey, that could have been my son out there, when he was talking about Trayvon Martin, and everybody's like, how dare Obama even talk about that? Blah, blah, blah. He doesn't like law enforcement. He hates the cops. He makes a statement in sympathy, in with empathy for the parents who lost a child in that type of a situation, and says, look, this is the reality that Black parents face with their children. We have to tell them that they need to be careful around the police. And he was roundly criticized for that. And everybody said, how dare he? We need somebody who's got some sort of empathy in this time right now to at least acknowledge that some of these feelings are real and justified. And the anger that people are showing right now is justified. I think it was Martin Luther King that said that this is the voice of the unheard.
I don't think Trump has been really watching the coverage of what's happening in Minneapolis. Because I tell you what, when I turn it on, I see a lot of white folks out there. I see a lot of white folks out there protesting, throwing stuff. I mean, they are on 10. And this kind of rebellion, I mean, to burn down a neighborhood precinct. First of all, for things to get so bad where the cops abandon the precinct. Can you even imagine? You know, pick your precinct in whatever neighborhood in Detroit, Grosse Pointe, Southfield, wherever you want to go, and imagine the cops leaving.
We saw that, you know, I may be the only one here who was, around during the '67 riots, but we saw it. I was down there that morning, Sunday morning. I was with my father had a bar at Grand River on 14th Street. We did the usual thing. We cleaned up at noon. We went over and got shoe shines next door, which was also a blind pig. But people were talking about the riots that morning over in 12th Street that had happened, and the city just blew up. And I understood. I was told by one of my classmates who was Black, a woman, Ruth English, who told me in June before we graduated, she said, there's going to be trouble this summer. There was supposed to be trouble the summer before. I mean, it had been building up. And once the fuse is lit, it's hard to, put out the fuse before things blow up. And we saw it. And I understood even in junior high, I understood why it was happening. And my father's bar got, it got all messed up. It didn't get burned down. Yeah. But I understood why, and I understand, now. I mean, it's hard to see, and I mean, it's interesting that in Detroit we've had incidents like Malice Green and things like that.
We just had the 25th anniversary of that just a few days ago,
where the city has been on edge. But it's interesting, in Detroit we haven't had that type of civil unrest here, and I think partly the neighborhoods were so devastated. It's taken literally 50 years for some neighborhoods to even have any, like 12th and Claremont, for them to put a park out there.
Yep.
Where, but the rage is there and the injustice is there. And I think it's just when the system fails, I think we get this reaction.
The quote that stuck with me in relationship to what happened last night was they had talked to one of the protesters out there, and I think it was a white guy that said, "You're burning." They asked him, said, "You're burning down these stores and tearing them up. Why are you doing that?" "Well, we're breaking the stores. We're breaking the businesses around here because the system is broken." That stuck with me, you know? It really did. Stop, dog.
Yes, the joys of
Come here,
live Zoom
puppy.
meetings from home.
So
Go ahead, ML.
I'm not, I don't want to criticize the protesters because I understand their strong passions. When I see things like this happen, it's like when the Free Press did a lot of stories about Kilpatrick. We certainly were attacked as being racist and all these other things, but whatever, that's going to happen. People don't like the messenger sometimes. But one of the things that always bothered me about the stories is that all the people who were racist used these stories to justify their warped worldview. And what I'm concerned about with these protests, particularly when they get so literally inflamed, is that the people who don't want to acknowledge the root problems, the people who don't want to do anything about it, point to this and say, that's why we don't want to do anything. That's why the cops put their knee on your neck. And I would never tell the protesters that they don't have the right to just, express themselves. But I hope that when we come out of this, and I hope that what happens in Detroit this afternoon is a protest, and I don't know how the rain's going to affect it, but I hope it's a protest that shows that we're thoughtful, we're addressing this emotionally, but also intellectually, and that we are making a point, and that we are not in any way going to try and give the people who have been resisting progress for far too long, longer than the last 3 years, a reason to say, that's exactly why we've got to get behind these cops who sometimes get out of hand. I mean, I think being a cop, particularly in a big city, is one of the hardest jobs in the world. It's right up there with being a teacher in a big city. But at the same time, and we're learning a lot during the coronavirus, that police have great discretion as to which laws and which cases they're going to go. And I'm just thinking, do you want to touch a guy you don't know in the midst of a coronavirus? I don't want to be anywhere near somebody's mouth, let alone kneeling on their neck. So I think this cop has some issues that go way beyond this.
His record suggests that he might. And that's the whole thing, though. I think we need to take a look at the way that police departments operate, the patrol shifts that these guys do, how often they're on patrol, off patrol, need psychological counseling every once in a while, because these guys do see a lot. They do deal with a lot of problems, and they do a lot of good work. But at the same time, when those stress levels get up there, you might not be making the best decisions. And there needs to be, I think, some sort of program in place to ensure that these guys, especially those that have troubled records, are getting the treatment that they probably need to prevent this type of thing from happening.
I was really surprised to see Mike Duggan do his press conference, his coronavirus press conference, and then go into, we're trying to hire 300 cops in the city of Detroit. And he goes, and he says that racism is real, ticks off those incidents where it happens, and says, we need to hire Black people, to make a difference. I was kind of shocked about that. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be. I mean, there are things about Mike Duggan that really kind of tripped me out. And then I remember I was telling Allan Lengel a while ago, back when we were on strike, Mike Duggan was the prosecutor. He came into the strike newspaper and gave us money, And so that kind of person, flash forward to today, it just seems like an amazing sort of transformation. And for him to say, we got to hire some Black cops, we need to make the police force more integrated, I think is a step in the right direction.
Well, hey, we've got reporters here today. You did see the CNN reporter who was arrested this morning while reporting from Minneapolis. There were two reporters from CNN there, one white, one Black. They arrested the Black reporter, not the white guy. They believed him when he said, yeah, I'm a reporter. Okay, great. Keep doing your work. The other guy says, I'm a reporter too. And they took him and his team into custody. Now, of course, he got out a couple hours later. But I mean, just like, and you see these guys in their riot gear, and they've got gas masks on, they've got face shields and everything else. This looks like a military outfit. It does not look like a police department. And I think that's a big part of the problem too. As we further militarize the police department, you're moving them further and further away from the population they serve.
Well,
You
but
know what, guys? I'll just let me say this, and I'll get it right to you, ML. The one thing about this coronavirus outbreak that I have found really interesting is that it has made us focus in on the day, to live in the moment, and yet the past always seems to keep living with us. The familiarity of this latest death just seems like nothing has changed, and so if you want to know what a post-corona world is going to look like, it looks like today. It looks like what's happening in Minneapolis. People are going to let this coronavirus thing go. They're gonna, they're gonna not heed ML's warning and wear masks and stay away. And they're gonna be like, we got to get back to normal. And part of the normal is getting out there and shaking the fucking tree when we get mad. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think people need to be heard, because I'm particularly concerned when things like this happen during a pandemic, because one way you control the masses is you scare the hell out of them. You turn us all into sheep. And so I'm glad there's still a few sheep with teeth around, but a lot of this comes down to a fundamental problem that we refuse to solve. And there was an attempt to solve it by Jerry Oliver when he was police chief, but that was quickly abandoned. I think diversity in the police department is absolutely critical. We need people who look like us. We need a security force that reflects the people who are being protected. And this is a message that isn't new. This is something that Coleman Young talked about. So this is a 40, 50-year-old message, and we're still trying to get this message in.
What's the breakup in the police department right now in terms of racial, like percentage-wise?
I'm trying to remember the number. I knew this back when I worked over there, but I can't remember the exact. But I think it's over 50%, if I'm not mistaken, African American.
But here's the problem that we have, and it looks like DPS is addressing this a little bit by trying to raise the incoming teacher salary. We pay police so little that the best cops are not going to come here, or they're going to get trained here and they're going to go somewhere else. We're taking people who are just out of high school, and I have no problem with people who don't go to college, but really what you want to have is this job to be a desirable job where there's competition, where you're turning away applicants, where you have people with criminal justice degrees who take this job because they'll make enough money to pay off their student loan, to buy a house, to raise a family. We don't do that. And I think one of the reasons why the cops react in these extreme ways is they feel persecuted. They feel paranoid in some cases, because quite frankly, when Greg and I were both working in City Hall, Greg for Mayor Archer and me for the Free Press, well, I guess that hasn't changed that much. There were 1,000 more cops on the street, 1,000 more cops on the street. I think if you're a cop, you feel very much on an island. You feel like it's them or me. The cops say it all the time. It's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, which means I'll kill a guy and see if I can beat him in court, rather than I'll lay off and get killed and my family mourns me. We need to increase the pay for police. We need to increase the size of the police department. We need to get better trained officers. People have had more life experiences. And frankly, if you are, I think, a very intelligent, a very capable minority candidate, you're going to do a lot better than getting a job with the Detroit Police Department. We got to do something to change that equation so that the best and brightest say, you know what? I'm going to serve my community. We have police in the leadership ranks now who got into police leadership because they were sick of seeing people like them getting pushed around, and they said, you know what? Maybe I could do better somewhere else, but I'm going to try and do something to change this formula for my people. And I think that we're losing that, and now we need to sweeten the deal. We need to say, you know what? Not only is it a good thing, not only is it the right thing, but you're going to be taken care of, and you're going to do pretty well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you guys can stick around for a little bit, can't you? Because we've got a bunch of stuff to get to, so we might as well just take this for a little while longer here. I do want to get to some other subjects that happen. Obviously, this is a huge deal, and we're not going to solve this problem today, but we are watching it very carefully, and we will see what happens. But last week, this time, we were talking about the possibility of Kwame Kilpatrick, of course, our former mayor, who was sentenced to 28 years. We thought that there was some reporting out there that he was going to get out of jail. That turned out to not be the case, and we've all obviously followed that as closely as you possibly could when it was going on. What was at the root of this? This Ebony Foundation seemed to say they had some inside information that turned out not to be true. ML, I'll start with you on this one, given your relationship with the former mayor and the work that you've done. What was going on there? Why were people so convinced that this was real?
Yeah, I feel like I'm serving a 28-year sentence. I mean, I can't escape this guy. It's like Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis chained together, but there's no jokes. And I'm better looking than Tony Curtis. But anyway, and Sidney Poitier is in better shape than Kilpatrick. But this is, I reported very early on, I found out about this press release at the same time other reporters did. Some ran to publish, whereas I went to go do some due diligence. In the end, the Free Press, using on-the-record sources, independent from a piece of paper, an email that was circulated, reported that it appeared the mayor was going to get out. But I think the press got stampeded. I think a news organization took this, and while perhaps it was accurate, there was a rush to be first. And I've always said I would rather be right than be first. And
I've got a theory.
I would rather that nobody reported it, because we don't know what happened. It's possible he was going to be released, and then there was some pressure turned up and people changed their mind. But I thought with the Kobe Bryant thing, we kind of learned that it's important to get some sort of credible official word. And the more we dug into the Ebony Foundation, some of the people behind it, I'm like, wait a minute. And this is not to diminish Ebony Magazine. We don't know what the hell the relationship between the Ebony Foundation is and the Ebony Magazine, other than somebody at the Ebony Foundation is trying to create this sense that it's connected. Right. We got to consider the source. We can't be in a rush to publish stuff that we just don't know is true.
Mm-hmm.
Very true.
I agree.
Alan, go ahead.
I'm in agreement with ML on this. It was a weird story to handle. We held back for a while, and then everyone was reporting it, so we were sort of aggregating. And we had a couple people on background who were, saying they talked to the Kilpatrick family. We had the Ebony people say, one of the guys from the Ebony Foundation said, "I talked to Kwame, and he's out," and stuff like that. I think what happened was, we had some exchanges with the Bureau of Prisons the following few days, and I think what happened, and this is just some of it's conjecture, and I think it's probably fairly close to what happened, is that they were reviewing everybody. There were 7 deaths at the Oakdale, Louisiana facility down there. It's a multiplex with, I think Kwame was in the minimum security part. They were reviewing everyone to see if anyone qualified to get out. You can also put in a request, and I think Kwame put in a request, and part of that request is that you put together a release plan. Here's what I'm going to do, and the prison, and we don't know if this happened or not, but the prison can call the person, which was Kwame's mother, to see if everything's correct and we can release him. I think he had a release date. He said, I'm going to be in quarantine. We're going to do this. I think his case manager was probably encouraging, and in the end, the case manager, I thought maybe the U.S. Attorney's Office or Justice Department had intervened, but last night, I updated the story. Last night, the Justice Department said we had nothing to do with it. We had no input in it, and so, which I was surprised, because I thought for sure they were meddling in it. But so I think what happened was Kwame got some optimistic news, and he probably said, "Yes, this is looking great. We've got the plan. They're with it." The case manager said, "Yeah, I'm going to try to get you out." And someone above said, "No, this guy's got like a 28-year sentence. We're not," and that's the thing. I mean, I have mixed feelings, because 28 years I feel is like way too long for that sentence. I mean, you can't tell me that 10, 14, 15 years doesn't send a message to that person. It doesn't send a message to other people. It's just not necessary. But the other part is he does have a 28-year sentence, and to let him go after 7 years, I think he should serve at least 10. And
in the meantime, Rick Wershe's getting out, what, 2 months early?
Yeah, Rick Wershe, who served like maybe 32 years.
He's getting out 2 months early.
He probably, I mean, I think never in the history of covering, at least covering federal law enforcement for decades, has anyone cooperated with the feds. I mean, Rick was involved with, a sting with the FBI, which ended up netting like a bunch of cops who got convicted. And Rick got not one day off of his time. I mean, he got arrested in '87. The sting, I think, was in '92. So there, and somewhere shortly thereafter, he should have, been out. I mean, he was a teenager. He served over 30 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, speaking as the other white boy, Rick, it's important to remember that while he was in serving time, he did some other stuff that did not help his case. But I will say, this is a guy who, based on the way we've seen informants and cooperators treated since, shouldn't have got as much time up front as he did. But it's also important to remember he spread a lot of blow around and ruined a lot of lives. So I really think we got to be careful about any romanticization.
Well, 15 years, I mean, for a teenager to get arrested, you can't tell me that 10, 15 years. Look, some of the guys like the Curry brothers who were way bigger than Rick. I mean, Rick was starting to move up the chain, but he was still not at the top of the chain. The Curry brothers served, I think, somewhere between 10 or 15 years, and they were big time, and they were out. And other guys like Nate Kraft, who were, convicted of multiple murders, they're out for cooperating. He's out for cooperating.
Well, Greg was going to chime in on this here.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave I grew up when White Boy Rick was, doing his thing, and I remember our neighborhood being terrorized by the crack cocaine epidemic and the shenanigans, where there was the Jackalones, the Sconiones, and I'm serious. Those were all gangs. So I'll leave that there. What I will say is that even in prison, Kwame Kilpatrick continues to teach us lessons. The whipsaw that we all went through in relationship to him getting out imminently to him not getting out at all, I think has a political impact. You have a couple of Democrats, Sherry Day Gunyogo, Karen Whitsett, who have been, really involved in this thing. You even had the mayor of Detroit saying, I hope he gets out and gets a fresh start and I'll help him, and the thought that he might be getting out and that Trump might do, a Kardashian and pardon the guy. And the thought being that will curry votes among Black folks is something that's been percolating out there for a long time. And so to have
what do you think?
Have these, I think, I think it probably would get a couple.
But I think the actions of the last couple of days probably more than negate that. I mean, you start talking about shooting looters. That's not a good thing.
Right. No, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing if you think that all the looters are Black. Minneapolis is a white city in a white state. With the exception of Prince, I didn't even know it was a bunch of Black folks there, to be honest with you. And so, Karen Whitsett and Sherry and them stepping out as Democrats, delivering that letter to Trump, Karen saying that she talked to Trump directly and that and was told that Kwame's going to get out, has all these political implications. And I'm not really sure where it will shake. I'm not really sure where it will shake out.
I think it's interesting is that, there's two things that work here. There's people who say Kwame didn't do anything wrong, and there's people, both Black and white in the city who say he did do something wrong. But I think one of the things that some people say, oh, he's Black and he got 28 years, is that, it's ridiculous. Whatever the reason was, he should have never gotten 28 years. I think that's just way excessive.
Jimmy DeMora, a white guy, got 28 years a year before. So
I know that was the precedent, but that was a wrong. When you set precedent on a wrong precedent, then you're headed down a slippery slope. I covered, Congressman Jefferson in New Orleans, who got 13 years for corruption, where he was trying to, bribe people and stuff to get contracts in Nigeria and all that stuff. And he got 13 years, and this was out of Alexandria, Virginia. And that was like, holy cow. And the next year, Blagojevich from Illinois got 14 years. And that was like, holy, shit.
He's out. So
speaking of which,
they should have given Blagojevich's barber 2 years.
What about the guy in Macomb County that
Bucci?
Yeah, I mean,
Dino
they dropped a
Bucci.
bunch of charges on him. You
Well,
think he'll
and
get?
there may
we'll
be
see
there may
what
be
they
some
get.
more coming there. I mean, so this is something I want to
And Morocco.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is something I want to say to everybody out there that always talks about, corruption in the city of Detroit, or that all these people are corrupt. Hey, look, it happens in the burbs too. And some of these things, I mean, and some of the bribes that these guys were taking, it's just like, wow, you can be bought that cheaply. It's amazing to me, some of the stuff that went on there and how deep this is. And when everybody says, well, the FBI's got all these people now in the Southeast Michigan region doing all these investigations, they do, because it's not just the city of Detroit. We have seen a pattern of this corruption in Macomb County for a long time, and now people are being held to account. And, I understand people saying, well, he didn't do a violent crime, he shouldn't get that much time. But at the same time, if they would have given Kwame Kilpatrick a slap on the wrist, 3-4 years, something like that, we'd say, see, you've got guys in jail for selling pot for 20 years, but you don't have, these guys who steal money, get away with it all the time. I understand why they're trying to send a message that this stuff is bad, because there does need to be some sort of penalty for ripping people off. And it hurts people. It's not a violent crime per se, but I'll tell you what, it does significant damage.
Well, and the sentencing guidelines include enhancements that are based on how much money you stole and whether you're a public official. And I think it's very important to send a strong and powerful message to public officials that if you cheat the people, if you do self-service over public service, if you betray your oath, there's going to be a cost. And I think there are a lot of people who saw Mike Duggan, a former prosecutor, basically say the city I'm helping pull out of bankruptcy, and struggling to do so, it's okay for the guy who put us into bankruptcy to just get a fresh start. I mean, I've heard from a lot of people who were stunned by what Mayor Duggan said. Now, I wasn't, because I know how much he likes Kilpatrick, and I know the loyalty that runs through that McNamara political bloodline. But, what I take out of what we learned from the Kilpatrick incident is a couple things. One of them is we've got to wait till we know something for sure before we publish it. I think the Free Press acted responsibly in the middle of a maelstrom, but I wish everybody had been responsible from the outset, because we might not have reported anything yet. I also think what we remember is that anything the Kilpatrick family says, you should not believe. And I also think that we learned, and I hope we're going to learn, that we take a moment to remind ourselves of why he got 28 years, that he cheated the people of Detroit. Murderers get sometimes less than 28 years, and people argue they killed somebody. They have one victim, and then there's some collateral damage from family and loved ones. Kwame Kilpatrick had at least 700,000 victims. This was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated campaign to wring as much money out of the city of Detroit and people who do business with the city of Detroit as possible. And this was not at a time when we had hipsters buying $7 coffees and beard wax in Corktown, okay? This was at a time when police were being laid off, public employees were losing their jobs, services were being cut. This was at a time when we didn't have anything to spare. And this flea still wanted to suck all the blood out of the dog. I'm sorry. When we talk about Kwame Kilpatrick, let's remember that too. This was a man who screwed this city. And so, sorry, pal.
Yeah.
I don't want you to die in prison, but I also don't want you to walk out after 25%. That's just not justice.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do say I agree with most what Mike says about all.
And we'll stop there. We're good.
But I have to say,
here we go.
when I did a column about Kilpatrick's sentence, and I referred to it was an Atlantic magazine article that was talking about a federal judge in the state of Washington, and the judge had been pushing for a prison in the northwest section of the U.S. because people had to travel so far to visit their loved ones. And so finally, there was a federal prison that opened in Oregon. The judge got on his motorcycle, drove 4 hours down for the opening. And as he was, for the official opening, there were prisoners already in there. And as he's walking around, some guy he said, "Hey, judge." And he goes, "You remember me?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "Yeah, you sentenced me, blah, blah, blah." And he said, he started visiting people like either twice a year or once a year. And he would go down and visit all the people that he sentenced, including a guy that he gave 10 years for bank robbery, multiple bank robberies. The guy's wife was sick. The guy needed money. And he says, "I gave him 10 years. What the heck? That seems right." And he says, "I went to visit that guy every year, and I saw the aging process and what 1 year means. And he says, I had a different perspective on sentencing instead of just, and so I totally agree. I mean, everything you say about the destruction of the city and sucking out, you know, the marrow out of the bone when there wasn't much, there was no meat on the bone left. And so I agree with you on that, Mike. But I think in the federal system, you know, that tries, there's supposed to be a balance between punitive and, you know, and a second chance. So I think what it would have been a fairer sentence would have been 15 years. But, you know, that's just my opinion. You certainly, I understand your argument. I understand the 28 years. I don't agree with it, but I totally
the jail time
Well, you
for
know,
me is not as important as whether or not this guy can ever run for office again. That's the thing that I
Right.
would worry about, and that's about it. But hey, we have to move on. And this one is for Greg and I, because Greg and I have both spent time in our careers as spokespersons. And every once in a while, you get to the office and something gets dropped in your lap that you have to figure out how to deal with. And it's just like, well, this one's a loser all the way around. I don't have a good answer for this one. We
sometimes
got one
bad
of
is
those
bad.
from the governor's office this week when her husband apparently tried to pull rank on getting his boat put into the water up near Elk Rapids. And the boatyard owner basically put it out there saying, hey, this guy just tried to pull rank. Say, would it help if I was the governor's husband? And he said, no. And he put it out there. For about a day or so, they didn't really respond at all. And then they came back and said, well, he was joking. Greg, how do you think this one was handled? Because it was stupid all the way around. This is rookie crap right there.
Yeah, it's totally working crap. And I think part of the reason why it was handled pretty poorly was because the governor just had her interview or whatever, her vetting to be vice president. I think that would be a great thing if she was able to do it, and we could get our first black governor as a result. But I think that probably played into their response as well. You know what I mean? In worrying about how this could impact the future. The other thing is that the coronavirus, the continuing tragedy around the virus and the state's response to that has got them on edge. And you had the flood happen in Midland, you know. And so with all these things running at them, a lot of times the big emergency, you know, Craig, is the one that sneaks up on you.
Well, it's
And
this kind of thing though that undermines people's confidence in your ability to handle those other big crises that are out
right,
there. And
right,
that's
for
the
sure.
biggest problem. I mean, you know what? If she would have come out and said, "Yeah, my husband did that, and I almost clocked him for it," you know, or just like he should know better than that. This is not, you know, what we're doing. I wasn't even going up north. The boat's going to be fine. Just come out there and say my husband's an idiot. She would have been better off, I think, in that
She could have
situation.
been
But it
better off on that.
threatens,
But the staff, think
adds
about the staff.
adds
This,
fuel to all the protests that are going on out there. If they think that this person can't be trusted, or they find a little chink in the armor, then they can keep going, and then
that
thus
they can drive a
potentially
truck through.
undermining that stuff.
I know, man. You know, it's the guy that owns the boat place. You know,
I don't blame them.
I mean, you know what? The truth of the matter is, I just don't believe it really for much of 1 second. If you have a relationship with somebody, you know, and it's the boat dock guy, you don't need to. Why wouldn't they go? Oh yeah, sure, not a problem.
It
You
was
know
an
what I'm saying?
employee. I think it was an employee who answered the phone. But I think in an instance like that, the best thing, I mean, the playbook in Washington always seems to be deny, when in
Right.
fact, the best thing, which he eventually did, was just to say,
Apologize.
yes, he said that. It was inappropriate. I didn't find it funny, and he should have never said it. Now let's move on. Who cares now?
Well, I mean, remember how much grief we gave Christine Beatty over the same thing?
Right.
Do you know who the F I am? I mean, you know,
Right.
anytime somebody tries to pull rank, that ticks people off. They are
Yeah.
going to attach on that. And that could be the one thing that turns them against her response to
Right.
this whole coronavirus, because now they think, oh, do as I say, not as I do. This is the kind of little thing that from a communication standpoint, if you don't get a handle on, it can make everything else spiral out of control.
Yep.
Well, the other thing too about this, I mean, the governor's had people show up on her front lawn with guns and protesting. And I thought about all the times I protested against Governor Snyder. You couldn't even get close to his house. It was gated off out there, you know, up by you couldn't even get close. And the husband trying to get the boat in the water. I mean, these are, you know, there's something amiss here. Like they haven't really figured out how to get in the bubble in the right kind of way where these kinds of situations don't happen. And to be honest with you, the governor's people from time to time tend to get so defensive about stuff. It takes them a while to sort of, come around. When I had to learn, you had to learn, we all know that the best thing to do is to answer it directly and to be less defensive. Acknowledge there's a problem
and don't lie or deceive.
Definitely don't lie to it.
Well, Lengel, I mean, this was your Schmuck of the Week nominee, was it not?
It was Dr. Mark Mallory. I'm sure what happened was he said, "Hey, can I get my boat in there?" And the employee says, "Well, you got a long line." He says, "Well, does it help?" I'm sure it was more than a joke. It said it kind of half jokingly, but does it help that I'm married to the governor? And they were like, screw you.
No.
But, it was.
Yeah, well, they were probably gunning for her anyway, man. I mean, think about it.
Yeah. I mean, we as reporters,
who does that?
Yeah, I mean, as reporters, we were always taught, like, even in a car repair place, you don't say, "Oh yeah, you better repair that properly," because I work at the Detroit News. I work at the Free Press. You better, it might not look good if, you try not to. I mean, sometimes, when they call, the car repair place calls and they answer Detroit News, doesn't hurt. But we were taught not to use our positions and to benefit us in any way. And she certainly knows the rules, and her husband was just being inconsiderate and being really an asshole to her by doing that.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't think that they were really prepared for the kind, and it's going to get worse should she become the nominee, the kind of spotlight, the glare of the spotlight that you will get under as a relationship to this. Remember Sarah Palin? She got out there and everybody found out about all the kookiness in her family. I mean, it became part of the story, part of the campaign. And the same thing is probably is bound to happen. Is bound to happen here. The governor will have to decide whether or not it is worth it to continue to go through this process, because it's only going to get worse, for her and for her family in terms of this.
Well, we got to wrap it up.
Okay,
can
I say
3
real
minutes
quick?
left.
My mother had a great line during the election.
Okay.
When McCain was running with Sarah Palin, she said to me, she thinks she's such a big shot, but you know what? In Alaska, even I could be a big shot.
All right. So Schmuck of the Week. Who wants to give their nominee next? We've got Greg or M.L. I assume you put some. I have Nancy Derringer's too. So while you guys are thinking about it, Nancy, who could not be with us today, gave me a Schmuck of the Week nominee anyway, and hers is Mark Zuckerberg as she says, for aggravated ass kissing of Trump's doughy backside. Excuse me. I just believe strongly that Facebook shouldn't be the arbiter of truth of everything that people say online, Zuckerberg said in an interview with Fox. Private companies probably shouldn't be, especially these platform companies, shouldn't be in the position of doing that. And she basically said that that amounts to basically a fat aggravated ass kissing of Trump's doughy backside, making Zuckerberg the Schmuck of the Week. Although when we look back at Facebook and what it has done, even though we're utilizing it right now, he could be Schmuck of the century.
Well, thanks for the doughy backside visual, but
yes, there you go.
I think I'm on the same wavelength as the Deadline Detroit team on my podcast, Soul of Detroit. Mark Zuckerberg was Geek of the Week, but the reason he was Geek of the Week is because he wants to pay people less for working at home. So in other words, I supply you with my furniture, my utilities, my office space, and you're going to pay me less? That seems like I should be getting a bonus for that. But my Schmuck of the Week is like publisher Lengel's. I don't fault the dentist, the first gentleman, because maybe he was kidding. Maybe he's not that politically sophisticated. My Schmuck of the Week is the comms team that decided to come up with a very good response, which is we don't comment on rumors, but you can only not comment on rumors if they're rumors, because now they're going to have to comment on every single thing and we know these days there's a lot of crap being thrown at you, because next time you say we don't comment on rumors, people are going to say, last time you told us that, it turned out not to be a rumor. So if this ends up costing Whitmer her shot at the VP spot, I don't blame the first gentleman necessarily. I blame the comms team for not handling it the right way, because nothing ever goes perfectly when you're a politician, but it's how you handle those moments that are success or failure. And they failed. I also think, just very briefly, that we're seeing the difference between someone who's been in office for less than 2 years and in the governor, and then with Duggan, somebody who's been in office for 7 years. When you have your team in place, when they've been battle tested, you're much better prepared to deal with the crises. And God bless anybody in office right now. There's no playbook for this except for the CDC playbook, which Trump lit on fire.
Very true.
I know, right? You know,
Greg
my
Bowens.
smuck of the week is that damn cop that had his knee on the brother there in Minneapolis. That's
Right.
the smuck of the week. You know what I mean?
I don't think schmuck is a good enough word for that one.
Well,
maybe damning him
you know,
with faint praise.
Well, you know, you got to put it to cast. That's the guy.
Yeah,
Because of his, and he had people telling him to get up, and he's sitting there with his hand in his pocket, looking at these people, almost daring them to do something. And then you had those other cops standing around him, protecting him. You know what I'm saying? Allowing him to kill the brother. Now that guy is the smuck of the week.
Well, you know, I was gonna vote for the woman in Central Park. She was there, and she was definitely going to be on my list. Just because that was just so ridiculous. But actually, no, I've got another person, and my schmuck of the week is Kevin Hassett. He's a White House advisor, does a lot about on what to do about the economy. And in an attempt to fix the economy, when, of course, Congress can't decide whether or not there's going to be a new stimulus package, Trump now saying he wants to take a pause on any new aid, except for this. Kevin Hassett is pitching on the Sunday shows last week that, you know, what's really going to get the economy moving is a temporary holiday on capital gains taxes. So once again, the Republican solution to every problem is to give more money to rich people. It has worked so well so far. And they keep going back to the freaking well. So Hassett, for even bringing that to the table, is my schmuck of the week.
It's also going to broaden the divide between the haves and the have-nots, because when you got money, because you're not worried about paying your bills, you can buy all these stocks when they're real low. Right. When you have the stocks that are real low and you don't want to sell them because they're real low, but you got to pay the bills, that's when you unload. So this coronavirus, one of the great tragedies, instead of us restructuring the way our society's set up to make sure that the people who do the jobs that we deemed essential, remember the guys used to mop the aisles that we used to just walk around? Well, guess what? They're the most critical people in the whole damn store. By the time this crisis is over, they're still going to be on the bottom rung. That's not right.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I mean, if you're watching TV over the next few days, which we all have been doing, obviously, notice a lot of the commercials we've been seeing about, you know, everybody cares and in these uncertain times and all this stuff, they're starting to fade away. We're starting to see a more sort of a resignation settling in, it seems, in the way people are dealing with this. And it's a much more of an uneasiness than we had a few weeks ago in this one. So just keep calm.
You know what, let me. I gotta say something. This donor ad that everybody's like, the donor ad agency and their ad about Detroit, this moment, I've seen that ad like a billion times, and people are talking about, oh, it's great, it's wonderful, it's got the Detroit grit. No, it doesn't. There are no Black iconic figures, signatures, buildings in that ad. You got Comerica Park, you got Little Caesars, you don't even have the fist. You don't even have the Joe Louis fist in that ad. So how is it possible that this ad is the greatest thing ever when it doesn't represent the iconic figures in a Black city? I don't get it.
There you go. I like it. So schmuck of the week to donor, apparently.
Yeah, you guys, you stupid ad.
Well, I'm getting tired of those, to be honest with you. I mean, it's like, it's nice to know that my auto insurance company cares so much. They haven't cut my rates, but anyway, actually, that's something that's coming up, auto insurance. I'm going to be talking about that next week on the podcast. I want to let everybody know that this will be available as a audio podcast a little bit later on today. The video will be posted on Deadline Detroit tomorrow morning. For those of you that couldn't watch the whole thing, it'll be there. We'll repost it for you there as well. I want to thank Michael Lucido for engineering the broadcast today. Thank you, Michael. You always do a fantastic job. I would like to thank regular guest Allan Lengel for being here once again. Thank you, sir. My friend Greg Bowens, thank you for doing it. And M.L. Elrick, we appreciate your time as well. Nice to see you back at the paper, my friend. It seems a good fit, and it's where you belong. So glad to have you back over there. And thank you, everybody who's been watching. Thanks to Samaritas for sponsoring this podcast. I really do appreciate that as well. And Allan?
Stay home safely.
My name's M.L. Elrick. I'm an investigative reporter and a connoisseur of fine yogurts. I know a little bit about Detroit. I know a little bit about deadlines. And I'm asking you to become a member of DeadlineDetroit.com. Like me, I'm not asking you to do anything I wouldn't do. I'm making a monthly donation. My wife is making a monthly donation. I know that seems redundant,
but they need the money, and the money goes to a good place. Getting the story out, getting the truth out. Because if we don't support local journalism, there's some people a couple blocks away from here who are going to get away with a whole bunch of stuff that's going to cost you a whole lot more than just a few bucks out of your pocket every month. Go to DeadlineDetroit.com, become a member. You'll see it's really easy at the top of the website. Give early, give often, give generously. Just give a damn. That's the best way I know how.
Hey, the Craig Fahle Show on Deadline Detroit is made possible by Samaritas, which is the state's largest private foster care and adoption agency. But they do a heck of a lot more than that. They've been serving homeless families, persons with disabilities, abused and trafficked women. They're also one of the largest resettlement agencies in the state. They provide market rate and affordable housing for seniors and HUD housing for families. And they also have skilled nursing, memory care, and rehab communities in Grand Rapids, Cadillac, and Saginaw. Samaritas, thanks for their support. Great organization doing great stuff all around the state.